Is Payton Talbot the real deal?
Payton Talbot!
Fighting has given me comfortability with myself and who I am. I can fully express myself without any limitations.
This kid is an absolute predator. He keeps moving forward. He seems unfazed by everything that happens. He plays the mental game. He keeps talking to his opponent.
He's got some very slick striking, and he's been through the fire to get to this point.
With Payton Talbot having a fight at UFC 311 versus Barcelos, many fans are very interested to see how Talbot fares in this matchup, as this will most likely be the toughest test of Talbot's young career, and if Talbot's able to get a win and even a finish over Barcelos, that could really thrust Talbot into the rankings and thrust him into a really good position going forward. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm JuicyMMA, I make opinionative MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it. When you look around the UFC and you talk about Payton Talbot, he appears to be one of the more, or maybe even the most impressive prospects we have in the UFC. As this guy's not even in the rankings yet in the bantamweight division, but he's put on some very impressive performances thus far. As when you look at Talbot's UFC career thus far, he's only had 3 fights under his belt, but he was able to win all 3 of those fights, and he was also able to get 3 finishes. And when you talk about a young prospect going 3-0 in his first 3 UFC fights, obviously that's impressive. But when you talk about a prospect that was able to get 3 finishes in his first 3 UFC fights, that's even more impressive. And also when you look at the division that Payton Talbot fights in at bantamweight, it's usually harder to get finishes when you talk about those lower weight classes. So obviously Payton Talbot is off to an amazing start so far into his young UFC career. And when you look at some of the fighters that this guy was able to beat, obviously he wasn't able to beat any guys that were ranked, but he was able to get some nice victories over some decent fighters. Where his most impressive win thus far throughout his UFC career was his fight against Cameron Saaiman. As in that fight, Talbot was able to absolutely dominate Saaiman in every aspect of MMA. He was stopping takedowns when Saaiman was going for them, he was landing very effectively on the feet with his punches, with his kicks, and overall it was very clear that Talbot was the far superior fighter in that current matchup. And the only reason for why Talbot wasn't able to get the TKO finish earlier than he was able to was due to the fact that Saaiman was a very young prospect in MMA. And if Saaiman had more experience under his belt and more damage to his chin, I think Talbot probably would have been able to get a first round finish. But a question that some of you may be wondering at this point is, why has Payton Talbot been able to be so effective thus far throughout his young UFC career? Well, in my opinion, it comes down to a couple different factors, but the first factor that I want to touch upon is his overall striking game. Because when you watch Talbot in all 3 of his UFC fights thus far, it's pretty clear that this guy is a very talented striker. As on the feet, he does a really nice job at staying technical, but also showing power. As on the feet, he does a great job at utilizing that jab, utilizing that length, as he is one of the bigger fighters in the bantamweight division, but he also does a great job at throwing a right straight and also has tremendous hooks. As in his fight against Cameron Saaiman, he was able to land his hooks a bunch of times on Saaiman, and he was able to hurt him significantly, even dropping him a few times with those hooks. But Talbot is also not just a boxer out there. He has a really nice ability to throw kicks as well, to the legs and to the body. And I think as time does progress, we're going to see an improvement to his kicking game as well, throwing some nice head kicks, setting up head kicks as well, and overall as his career does progress, I think in all aspects of his game, we're going to see some significant improvement. But outside of just his striking ability, Talbot has also shown an ability on the ground. As in his fight against Saaiman, he did show a pretty good takedown defense. Now obviously Saaiman isn't known for his wrestling ability, but regardless, he was shooting for takedowns a few times, and Talbot was able to stop all of his takedown attempts. And also in his first ever fight, Talbot was able to find a submission victory in the 3rd round, so obviously there is some skill on the ground as well. And overall, when you look at Talbot's overall skill and ability on the feet and on the ground to an extent as well, I think you are talking about a guy that is very skilled and very talented. But the next reason for why I think Talbot has been able to be so effective thus far is something that I talk about in a lot of my videos, but that's has physicality. Because when you look at Talbot, he obviously was able to find 3 finishes in his first 3 UFC fights, but he was getting hit a little bit at times against Simon, but he was able to take all the shots without getting hurt whatsoever. And when he landed on Simon, he basically hurt him every single time. And of course, he was eventually able to get that TKO finish in the second round. Obviously, in his last fight against Gamori, he was able to get a first round finish with literally the first shot that he landed, which just shows the type of power that Payton Talbot has at the bantamweight division, which is pretty impressive. And overall, as I said in a lot of my videos, guys who are extremely physical are going to be guys who, for the most part, are going to be at the top of their divisions in terms of being UFC champs, or at least top 5, top 8 fighters in their respective divisions. And I do think Payton Talbot, as long as his skill continues to improve, I do think he's eventually going to be in that category at the bantamweight division. But now let's look at Talbot's upcoming fight against Barcelos. So as I mentioned before in the video, I do think this is probably going to be the toughest test of his young career thus far, and that's because Barcelos is a pretty good and pretty well-rounded fighter. Obviously, Barcelos isn't one of the best guys in the bantamweight division, but I do think he has a lot of skill. On the feet, he definitely has an ability to strike. On the ground, he has a really good jiu-jitsu game, has submitted a bunch of guys in the past, and for the most part, this guy is a very tough and well-rounded fighter. And when you look throughout his UFC fights, he does have a lot of wins over some really good fighters in the bantamweight division, and really the only losses he has is by decision in relatively close fights. The only time that he did get finished in the UFC, at least in recent memory, was against Umar Nurmagomedov, who's going to be fighting for the bantamweight title on that same card. So obviously Barcelos does have a lot of skill to him. Now I would say the one negative for him is he is getting a little bit older. But in this fight for Payton Talbot, I don't think he should overlook Barcelos. In this fight, I think what Payton Talbot should do, and I think he will do, is utilize his length. I think he's going to do a really nice job at utilizing the jabs, utilizing the right straight, at times when he does get in close, utilize those very effective hooks that he does possess, and overall, at the end of the day, I do think he will win this fight by decision. I think there could be a couple of times where Barcelos does have some success. I think Barcelos could possibly take down Payton Talbot. As I said, his takedown defense hasn't been tested all that much. In the limited times that we have seen it be tested, he was able to succeed, but of course that was against Simon, who isn't necessarily known to be one of the better wrestlers in the division, or really a great wrestler in general. So I do think there is some questions that are left to be unanswered, but if I had to give my official prediction for this matchup, I do think Payton Talbot's gonna win. I think he's gonna win by decision, and I wouldn't be surprised if Barcelos does have a couple of moments of success in this fight. But for the most part, I do think Payton Talbot is the real deal. I think on the feet, he's very technical and improving as time does progress. Obviously, he has a great amount of power in his hands, and I think he's improving his kicking game as well, improving his takedown defense, improving his ground game, and I think overall, you're talking about a guy who in the future is going to be a very well-rounded fighter, and as I said, I do think he's going to pass this test against Barcelos with flying colors. Now, another question that some of you may be wondering at this point is, do I think Payton Talbot is going to be a UFC champ in the long-term future? Well, in my opinion, obviously it is very early. He isn't even ranked yet, and this would be a really interesting test to see how he performs against Barcelos. But regardless of that, I do think this guy is going to be in the conversation to be champ in the future, and I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if he does eventually become champ. I think the fact that obviously he is very skilled, and the fact that he has great size out there is going to prove to be very big for him going forward in the future, because when you match him up against some of these guys like Umar, Merab, even Peter Yan, he's going to have a significant size advantage over all of them. Now obviously all those guys are really good at wrestling, in particular Merab and Umar, and obviously that is something that is relatively unproven with Payton Talbot, but regardless, if he is able to figure out some of that takedown defense, I do think the size and power is going to be a problem for a lot of guys in the bantamweight division. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Payton Talbot is the real deal, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.